Rain lashed down. Thunder rattled the old car. John strained to see through the downpour. He was lost, hopelessly lost. Then through the sheets of water he saw it, a silhouette against the raging storm. The house of dead. John pulled the car to a stop. He sat for a moment, engine ticking, staring at the house. It was a Victorian mansion, once grand, now crumbling. Every window was dark, like empty eyes. He took a deep breath. Time to face his fears. John stepped out of the car into the storm. The wind howled around him. He slammed the car door shut. The sound was swallowed by the storm. He was alone. He started towards the house, each step heavy with dread. The front door creaked open as if inviting him in. John hesitated, then stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. He spun around, heart pounding. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp and decay. John fumbled for a light switch. The room remained stubbornly dark. He took out his phone, the dim light doing little to pierce the gloom. Dust motes danced in the weak beam. Cobwebs hung from every corner. The house felt cold, unwelcoming. He took a tentative step forward. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight. He froze, listening. Silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a waiting silence. A silence that listened back. John continued deeper into the house. He found himself in a grand hallway. A sweeping staircase dominated the far end. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow him as he moved. He could have sworn he heard a whisper. He stopped, holding his breath. There it was again, a whisper, soft and indistinct. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. John shivered. He told himself it was just the wind, but deep down, he knew it was something more. He continued down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. He thought he could almost make out words filled with sadness and anger. John reached the foot of the grand staircase. He looked up into the darkness that clung to the upper floors. He felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he shouldn't go any further, but something drew him on. He took a step onto the first stair. It creaked ominously under his weight. He paused, listening. The whispers had stopped. But now there was a new sound, a low, guttural growl. It seemed to emanate from the shadows at the top of the stairs. John shone his phone's light up the staircase. He thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows, tall and gaunt, with long, sharp fingers. But when he blinked, it was gone. Just a trick of the light, he told himself. But his blood ran cold. John forced himself to continue up the stairs, each step echoing ominously in the silence. Each step was an effort of will, the creaking wood beneath his feet sounding like distant thunder. The growls grew louder as he ascended, reverberating through the walls and sending chills down his spine. He reached the top of the stairs and found himself in a long, dark corridor, the shadows seeming to move and shift around him. The air here was even colder, if that was possible, his breath visible in the dim light as he exhaled. He walked slowly down the corridor, his hand trailing along the wall, feeling the dust and grime under his fingertips. He came to a door. It was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it swayed in the draft. He pushed it open and peered inside. It was a bedroom, shrouded in darkness and mystery. A four-poster bed dominated the room, its heavy drapes adding to the oppressive atmosphere. And on the bed lay a figure, shrouded in shadows, its form barely discernible in the gloom. A skeletal figure, its empty sockets staring up at him, as if accusing him of some unknown crime. John stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, the sight of the skeleton searing into his mind. He had to get out of this house, now! Panic surged through him, making his movements frantic and uncoordinated. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut in front of him, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. He rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped, the walls closing in on him as the growls grew louder, more menacing. Panic surged through John, his heart raced and his mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. He pounded on the door, but it was no use. He was trapped. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the air grew colder with each passing second. He sank to the floor, his back against the cold wood, and tried to calm his breathing. He had to think. His mind raced through every possible escape, but nothing seemed feasible. There had to be a way out of this. Then he remembered. A faint memory from his childhood, a story his grandmother used to tell. He had read about the House of Dead. It was a place shrouded in mystery and fear, a place no one dared to enter. Local legend claimed it was haunted by the spirits of those who had died within its walls. The stories were chilling, filled with whispers of lost souls and eerie apparitions, and that the only way to appease the spirits was to hold a séance. It was a ritual that required courage and a strong will. John looked around the room. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, and the silence was deafening. There was a small table in the corner. It was covered in dust, and the wood was old and worn. He rushed over to it and began rummaging through the drawers. His hands moved frantically, searching for anything that could help. He found candles, matches, and a Ouija board. The items felt heavy in his hands, laden with the weight of what he was about to do. He quickly set them up on the table, his hands shaking. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows around the room. He had never done this before, but he was desperate. Desperation drove him to light the candles and place the Ouija board in the center. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The room seemed to grow colder, and he could feel the presence of something unseen. He knew this was his only chance to escape the clutches of the haunted house. John lit the candles, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. He placed his hands on the planchette of the Ouija board and closed his eyes. "Is anyone there?" he whispered. The room was silent. Then slowly the planchette began to move. It darted across the board, spelling out a single word: "Help!" John's heart skipped a beat. He cleared his throat. "Who are you?" he asked. The planchette moved again. "Trapped." John felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He was talking to the entity. The entity began to communicate more freely, its messages coming faster and faster. It told John a tale of betrayal, of murder, of souls trapped within the house. John listened, his fear giving way to a strange sense of pity. The entity told John that it could help him escape from the nightmare he found himself trapped in. But there was a catch. It would only assist him if he agreed to help it in return. The entity needed John to find its remains, which were buried somewhere deep within the confines of the old eerie house. Only by locating and unearthing these remains could the entity finally be at peace and move on from its restless existence. John hesitated. He was terrified of what he might uncover. But amidst his fear, he also felt a strange sense of obligation and empathy for the tormented spirit. He agreed to help. The entity guided him to a hidden room in the basement, a place that had been long forgotten and untouched by time. John made his way down the creaking wooden stairs, each step echoing in the silence, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay, making it hard to breathe. He finally found the room the entity had described, hidden behind a false wall. With a deep breath, he pushed open the door and stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The room was empty except for a single wooden chest in the center of the floor, covered in dust and cobwebs. John knew instinctively that this chest held the key to the entity's freedom. He approached the chest cautiously, his hands trembling, and slowly lifted the heavy lid, bracing himself for what he might find inside. As John lifted the lid of the chest, a blinding light erupted from within. He shielded his eyes, crying out in surprise and fear. When the light subsided, he cautiously looked again. The chest was empty, but standing before him was a figure, the entity. It was a ghastly apparition, its form shifting and swirling like smoke, its eyes burning like hot coals fixed on John. A cold, malevolent smile spread across its face. John realized with a growing sense of horror that he had been tricked. "You freed me," the entity hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "But I never promised to let you go." John stumbled back, his blood turning to ice. He had made a terrible mistake. The house, he now realized, had never intended to let him leave. John turned and ran. He raced through the house, the entity's chilling laughter echoing behind him. He dodged cobwebs and leaped over fallen debris, his only thought escape. He had to get out, no matter what. He burst out of the house and into the storm. Rain lashed at his face, the wind screaming in his ears. He didn't care. He kept running, his lungs burning, until the house was nothing but a distant silhouette against the raging storm. John collapsed on the muddy ground, gasping for breath. He had escaped, for now. But he knew deep down that he would never be truly free of the House of Dead. It had claimed a part of him, a part he could never get back. John eventually made his way back to civilization, his clothes torn and his mind shattered. He tried to tell his story, but no one believed him. They said he had been caught in the storm, that the house was just an old, abandoned place. But John knew the truth. He saw the house in his nightmares. He heard the whispers in the silence. He felt the entity's cold, malevolent gaze on him, always watching, always waiting. He was a prisoner in his own mind, forever haunted by the house of dead. And then one day John disappeared. Vanished without a trace. Some say he went back to the house, drawn back by some unseen force. Others say the house finally claimed him, body and soul. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the house of dead always